thank you for joining us again for the fourth webinar in this series. Those that have joined before, you know my name is Michael Raymond, and I'm the head of Lpc Cresa's industrial team, and I'm your host today. This Q&A series is drawn from our experiences with Australian office tenants and explores the common problems our clients are encountering and the solutions we've been able to provide. Just as a quick reminder for those of you that have a retail focus, the principles remain the same, but you may want to have a quick look into our weekly retail Q&A series, which takes place every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Sydney time. For further details, look on our website, lpc.com.au. I trust you are keeping well and remaining safe. Like many of you, I've been working from home, and one of the most difficult things I've found is keeping track of the date and time. So for those of you that share this problem, just as a reminder, today is Blur's Day and it's the 81st of April. Anyway, back to formalities. As you know, my role is to, one, introduce the panel and the speakers for this week and the questions they'll be answering, and two, to manage the Q&A session towards the end. Thank you. We've brought together a panel of expert tenant advisors and workplace specialists. We've got Julian, one of our directors specialising in the office sector, Rebecca Pelling, our Managing Director of Project Services, both of whom will be our speakers today as well. Ken Lamb, one of our directors focusing on the office sector, who joins us again back from a brief break last week, and me, who just makes up the numbers. Julian will be continuing on from last week with the revolution of lease arrangements during and post COVID-19, and then we'll hear from Rebecca, who will continue with the no-touch workplace revolution. The format for this series has been drawn from problems our clients are facing in relation to lease and workplace readiness during and post COVID-19. It's based on our successful weekly Q&A webinars we've been running now for 9 or 10 weeks now for our retail tenants. Our speakers will provide you with a range of solutions to problems relating to leases and workplaces, both during and post COVID-19. The idea is to keep the presentation brief to around 15 to 20 minutes and to allow for at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. So on the way through, as always, if you have any questions that come to mind, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll get through as many of those as I can towards the end. Okay, I'll hand over to Julian now, who will speak to the first question, the revolution of lease arrangements during and post COVID-19. Thanks, Julian. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So how do we get leases ready to meet the post-COVID-19 challenge? Lpc Cresa has been assisting tenants navigate COVID in 3 key areas, namely in the form of rent relief in response to the immediate impacts of COVID-19, lease restructuring and lease renewals for post-COVID-19 readiness, and portfolio optimisation where tenants occupy more than one premise. If we go to the next slide, please. So the question, the revolution of lease arrangements during and post COVID-19. We've spoken, so ultimately it's about identifying the problems that COVID-19 brings and mitigating those within our leases as best we can. In the past few weeks, we've spoken about pandemic clause, backdated COVID-19 relief, contraction and termination rights. This week, we'll be focusing on rent and rent reviews, and in the weeks to come, building performance and prohibited tenants within the building. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today is to determine what an appropriate rent and rent review structure will look like post-COVID-19. And to start with, we should have a look at what pre-COVID-19 and our existing leases look like in terms of rent and rent reviews. Most commercial leases contain high face rentals, and a face rent is a rent that has been inflated for the provision of an incentive or benefit received by the tenant, combined with fixed rental escalations ranging anywhere from 3 to 5% annually. So how do we get to this position? One of the provisions is market conditions. Sorry, there seems to be a bit of an echo. Market conditions. So if we focus on Sydney, for example, there was very low vacancy leading up to COVID, and therefore it became more of a landlord market, and the provisions for higher escalations could be set by the landlords. Incentives also are used to support and keep face rents escalated and push up fixed increases. So why does a landlord like this mechanism and this structure? Well, the landlord's motivated, their key motivation is valuation. So the ability to secure a higher income or cash flow stream over the term of a lease is very beneficial because the valuer will look at multiplying that by a yield, which results in a higher sale price or valuation. So that's a very important multiplier for the landlord. In addition, retail trusts and institutional landlords need to provide their investors with year-on-year income growth, and hence the need for fixed increases. There is an element of risk for the landlord, and that is providing upfront incentives to push up the face rents and the annual reviews can be risky where the tenant goes into administration, and hence the reason why we've seen a lot more bank guarantees and security needed historically. And also the question is why for tenants? So the tenant is also motivated by incentives. So someone paying for their fit out is very beneficial. And also, or in addition, having a known rental structure with no surprises is an advantage and something that all of our clients do value. If we look at market rent reviews, so if we go back some 20 years, market rent reviews during initial terms were far more common. Typically, these were based on effective market rent reviews, especially for government leases. And an effective market rent review is a rental that has not been inflated by the provision of a leasing incentive or benefit. So it's really a true reflection of market. The issues with market rent reviews is that the landlord and tenant typically disagree on what that actually is during the term. And this can often lead to a souring of the relationship and it going to a determining valuer, which is costly and often outside of one's control. So in other words, you can be surprised by the outcome at times. There are pros to a market rent review, and these include paying what the market is dictating. So if the market rises, you pay a higher rent. If the market falls, you pay a lower rent. So that there is advantages on that front. The cons of a market rent review include rents can escalate quickly and therefore they can be difficult to forecast. Rent is also dependent on comparable leasing transactions. So if there's a market review and you're relying on comparable evidence, sometimes evidence has got hidden incentives and benefits which are difficult to identify, and therefore you may not be agreeing to a true effective rental. There are also time of the essence clauses, which means that you have to dispute notices exchanged with the landlord within prescribed periods of time, and missing those can result in the landlord's assessment holding for the balance of the term or until the next review. Time consuming is another one, and costly. So these are all things that are some of the negatives of market rent reviews. If we then go to CPI reviews were also more common. However, given the landlord's motivation around year-to-year income growth, they have been pushed back a lot more. And if I give you a fact, which is over the last 10 years to March 2020, the average annual increase for CPI or Consumer Price Index was a mere 2.25%. So well and truly below the 3 to 5% that I mentioned in terms of fixed reviews earlier. We have seen, and it's common in the past as well, where CPI is agreed subject to CPI plus 1%, for example, or a CPI with a cap and a collar. But in many ways, this defeats the purpose of a CPI. Fixed increases are pretty self-explanatory. There's no surprises. Both the tenant and the landlord know what they're going to be up for. So, you know, it's a known rental structure, which can easily be valued as well. The question around annually or other, CPIs and fixed increases historically have been done on an annual basis. Sometimes fixed reviews can be every 2 years. If we look at market rent reviews, if it's a pure market rent review only, it can be every 2 years. But if it's a midterm market review, there's usually combined with fixed or CPI reviews on either side, depending on the term of the lease. Now, the big question is, what does post-COVID look like in terms of our leases? And I think the question really is around the uncertainty around the recovery. So we're anticipating an L-shaped recovery being a slow recovery with low growth for a prolonged period of time. So when we talk to our tenants, it's very much factoring in what their recovery looks like over the next few years, and that should reflect in any lease agreements being entered into with a landlord. So we are pushing for a greater number of CPI reviews, uncapped and uncollared, so a true reflection of where the cost of goods is going in the economy. Also, the return of a midterm market rent reviews, being careful about what they actually provide for and what they will entail, to my point earlier, being an effective review particularly. And also fixed increases are likely to stick around. However, it will be at lower rates, and we have already seen those rates at around 3%. And I will say the purpose of the picture, the tortoise, is because we want to slow rent and rent reviews down, so hence the picture. I'll now hand over to Rebecca, who will focus on workplace readiness, and she's just going to jump in my chair.
Hello, everyone. Right. So Lpc Cresa has been assisting tenants navigate COVID-19 in 3 areas. It's to do with people, place, and protocols. The no-touch workplace revolution is very relevant as companies look to have staff reoccupy the workplace, albeit on a reduced density due to physical distancing requirements and limitations with public transport. If we go to the next slide. Last week, we introduced the idea of the no-touch workplace. We established that if we can do it at pedestrian crossings, then we must be able to do it in our workplaces. Next slide, please. So the no-touch revolution can be applied to all stages of the journey, from preparing to leave home, commuting, accessing the building facilities, as well as the workplace. You'll see on the screen that I have listed a few of these. There are some really simple solutions that are nil cost, such as chocking the door open, which I've mentioned before, and then others such as using nanoseptic skins or RFID controls. Deciding what to do and how to do it is one of the challenges companies are faced with. To this point, I must reiterate and stress that all companies must by law have a COVID-safe plan prepared for their workplace or workplaces. We have prepared a number of these now for our clients and can state that you can't take a cookie cutter approach to this. All of our clients have had very different business models, differing concerns for staff and vulnerable staff, and differing approaches to how they would like to engage with their clients. That's why undertaking a detailed risk assessment is fundamental to preparing your COVID-safe plan. This should be prepared in consultation with your staff so that you are drawing on the experience, concerns, knowledge, and ideas of your people to assist with identifying hazards and choosing appropriate control measures. This information is invaluable. I'm going to touch on 2 of these technologies in the next couple of slides. Before doing that, I want to point out that landlords that want to distinguish their buildings from others will start to promote their no-touch credentials, just as they were doing with the end-of-trip facilities and green credentials. There is a lot that they can be doing with programming lifts for tenants using RFID technology and providing hands-free washroom and end-of-trip facilities. Next slide, please. The first one I'll touch on is nanoseptic skins and mats. I really like these, even though they do still rely on touch, and I have a number of reasons why. The first is that they can be easily applied to a high traffic volume public touch points for a relatively little cost. So what is a nanoseptic skin? The really simple answer is they are a continuously self-cleaning surface. The more technical response is that they are powered by light using mineral nanocrystals, which create a powerful oxidation reaction. They work 24/7 and the surface continually oxidizes organic contaminants. Unlike disinfectants and cleaners, the nanoseptic surfaces don't use poisons, heavy metals or chemicals, and nothing is released from the surface since the crystals are molecularly bonded to the material. Here we see it being applied to door handles, to washroom doors, as a mouse mat, and a surface on which you can store your personal items. Its applications are many. Next slide, please. The second technology or control that I'm talking to now is the radio frequency identification, RFID, which is the wireless non-contact use of frequency waves to transfer data. It's commonly used in product tracking as a cost-effective way to track inventory and as a substitute for barcodes. Common RFID applications are in hospitals for inventory tracking, controlling access, monitoring and tracking staff and patients, and tracking consumables and large expensive items. Another is toll road payments with RFID technology used to electronically collect tolls from passing cars. So it's a really inexpensive contemporary solution that is available, which can be deployed to the workplace and to buildings to enable no touch, either via your security card swipe or simply with your mobile phone and with Bluetooth and apps enabled. Its applications can include programming lift door opening, lift controls programmed to specific tenant floors, room access, locks on toilet cubicles, touchless printing, opening lockers, workstation registration and occupation, and tracking movements through the workplace and building. So these are just two of the technologies which we've been discussing with our clients when preparing their COVID-safe plans. If you need any assistance, please feel free to send me an email, rpelling@lpc.com.au, or my phone number is at the end of this presentation. Michael, back to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Now, got a few questions. I think I'll bring Ken into the fold. You there, Ken?
Yep.
Very good. We have an option for renewal coming up, which contains a market review. Are you able to provide any advice on what to look out for? We haven't exercised the option yet.
Thanks, Michael. Certainly a good question, and I guess it kind of touches on what Julian was speaking to at the start of the presentation. Look, it's important to understand what type of structure is noted in the lease in terms of the market rent review provisions, and as to whether it has regard to market incentives, whether there is a cap or collar or ratchet clause. And going back to Julian's point, an effective market review. But look, it's equally important just to understand what options are available before making a decision whether to exercise the option term. Look, based on our experience, we typically find that a tenant will get a better outcome if they restructure the lease rather than exercising the option term. Look, the option is typically an option. You don't have to exercise it if you don't want to. Look, it's typically an insurance policy there just in case you do run out of time. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Ken. Look, I've got one to Rebecca. Those little septics, nanoseptics.
Nanoseptic skins.
Yeah, them. How much do they cost?
Good question. So you can buy a pack of the larger ones that you would apply to a large door handle or a large push door. I think you can get 25 of those for $100. Smaller ones that you could put onto a smaller door handle, I think about 25 of those is $40 to $50. So I think quite affordable. The lead time is about 4 weeks, I think, at the moment. But you know, if you're preparing your workplace, it's worthwhile considering.
And Rebecca, can I just ask you, how often do you need to change them? Because obviously that's going to be the next question.
How about I'll answer that at next week's seminar, because I don't know the answer to that one, but it's a good question, Neil. Thank you.
Oh, the suspense.
Oh, the suspense. I know. Keep everyone waiting.
All right, Julian, don't look so smug there. I'm going to give you a question now. You talked about CPI rent reviews. Can a CPI review result in a rent reduction as a result of a negative CPI?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think we're forecasting for CPIs to reduce. It's not something that's ever really been anticipated in many leases. So you'll find that there's probably silent clauses where there are CPI reviews, but the answer is yes, it can go down if there's a negative review, if there's a negative CPI figure that comes through.
Okay.
That's why landlords don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see, I've got a few more. Ken again, please. Our rent review, which was due on the 1st of June this year, wasn't implemented due to the mandated code, which did not permit reviews to occur, obviously, during the COVID-19. What happens to the review? Is it waived, backdated, post-COVID, or implemented at the end of COVID? You know, that sort of scenario. What are the implications?
Thanks, Michael. Look, the code is actually, it is a grey area in terms of whether a landlord can actually, I guess, backdate a review. Look, our position or our advice is, given that the review was to take effect during COVID, the landlord has effectively, given that it's been waived, it should be waived, and it shouldn't be backdated, or there shouldn't be a future increase on that.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. Another one from Julian. We have fixed reviews in our lease for another 5 years. Is there a way to reduce these going forward?
So, okay, so we've got fixed reviews. Look, it's not an easy situation. The reality is those lease provisions are locked in. So it would come down to a negotiation with the landlord to see what, you know, based on negotiating, what could be the outcome to reduce those reviews, whether it's an extended term or, as per my comments in previous weeks, whether it's giving up a clause that you don't, that the tenant no longer needs.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy one, and there is a contractual obligation there.
Okay. Back to you, Rebecca. What about the use of thermal scanners for checking temperatures, I assume that means?
In respect of no-touch technology, look, there's a number. I'm just going to go back a step and talk about the risk assessment. So in doing the risk assessment for your COVID safe plan, you obviously need to look at what the risks are to your return to work. So a number of clients are looking at either testing temperatures in the workplace or having staff doing their own testing at home before they come to work, and logging that on a daily basis. There is the concern that if you don't have a no-touch thermal scanner, i.e. you're just using a laser thermometer, that you have to be within 1.5 metres of the person to actually take that temperature. And I know we have one particular client who's very concerned about that because their reception staff are in a high risk due to their age. So my response is, start with your risk assessment, look at the protocols that you're establishing for how you register your staff and your visitors to the premises, and look at whether, if you don't want to invest in something that's that expensive, how you can manage the risk to people taking the temperatures or not. So I don't think it's a one answer for all.
Okay. Look, just one final question.
Particularly multiple floors over a building, and you've got, you know, a couple of hundred people coming in at one point.
Yeah.
So you have to look at, you know, how it can be pragmatic but still address the core underlying issues.
Okay, thanks. The last question's for you as well, Rebecca.
Oh.
Please. Why would clients want to track staff movements in an office?
Okay. So and it depends how you want to read the obligations to be able to report should you have an incident of someone being infected in the workplace or coming to the workplace infected. The benefit of being able to track somebody is that you can see if they've entered your workplace, where they may have been seated for the day or what rooms they have used. And so therefore you're able to report that information back, and if you have to do a deep clean, you can prioritise spaces they may have used. And there are a number of different ways you can do that, but enabling it through your phone and Bluetooth is one method.
Okay. Look, that's that's about it for the questions. Perhaps we could just go to the next slide, please, Niels. And that brings the session to a close. Once again, we really do hope that today's session proves to be helpful and informative. So once again, thanks again to Julian and Rebecca and Ken, of course. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact one of us. Our details are on the screen now. Next slide, please, Niels. Please join us again same time next week for our next webinar in this series. Next week, our experts will be tackling part 5 of the revolution of the lease arrangements during and post COVID-19. Julian will specifically be talking to building performance, and Rebecca will once again continue with the no-touch workplace revolution. Finally, and once again as a reminder, all of today's attendees will receive an email with a link to the recording of this webinar. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues and anybody else that you may find that you think may find the content interesting. So once again, thanks for joining us. Have a good afternoon, stay safe, and we look forward to you joining us again next week. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye for now.